Hello and welcome to the X's and O's with Greg Cosell. I'm Doug Farrar with the USA Today Sports Media Group, and the guy over there is Greg Cosell back at NFL Films in Mount Laurel, New Jersey after a week at the Combine. And we're going a day early. We took a couple weeks off after the Super Bowl, and it's Super Tuesday because Greg's here. That's what we're calling that. And Greg, you and I were both in Indianapolis for the full week of the NFL Combine, the big car wash, my favorite week of the year. And before we get into some players whose drill times may have magnified their efforts on the field in the minds of NFL evaluators, how many combines have you been to?
What year did the Texans come into the league? Do you remember
2000,
offhand?
2002.
Then I think I started in 2000. So I've been every year since, except obviously there was no combine during the pandemic year, but
Right.
everyone since then 2000.
So in this sense, you are a millennial.
Perhaps, yes, if you'd like to
Perhaps.
say that, yes.
Yeah, this was my 17th combine. I went for the first time in 2007. So I wanted to start before we get into some, players and what we do.
Sure.
Um, your combine experience is a little different. Like, yeah, I think you're on the field for most of the drills, right?
I can be, yeah. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
go on the field for all of it, but I certainly go on the field for the quarterbacks and the receivers, yes.
Right. And then a lot of what you do during the week, and we don't want to reveal names or talk out of school or anything, but you're talking to coaches, and coaches want to talk to you, and that's a thing for you. I think it's the most valuable part of it for you. Like,
Yes.
you've told
I
me.
mean, obviously, I enjoy the workouts. It's always nice to see that. But the best part for me is just the conversations, both planned and off the cuff. As you know, being there, you walk the halls of the convention center, you can see a coach, and you can have an 8-minute conversation. That's phenomenal.
Mhm.
But the key for me is to keep learning more football, to
Mhm.
to talk about what's going on in the league. Coaches, scouts, anybody that's involved in studying the game, and these guys know that I'm not a reporter. Like, I'm not. If I'm talking to a scout, and I met a scout this year who I hadn't known before, and we had a great conversation for an hour and a half about players in this draft. But they know that I'm not interested in what their draft board looks like. I'm not looking for a scoop. I'm not a reporter. I just love talking ball and learning more and more. And then it helps me tremendously when I come back and watch tape, because you just then see things differently. You hear things differently when you talk to coaches. Sometimes a coach will say something to me and I'll know exactly what he's saying, but the way he says it just resonates differently than the way I was thinking about it. And then it helps me tremendously. So those kinds of conversations, when you talk about, let's say, trends in the league, or what teams are doing in certain situations, why there's more quarter structure, let's say, things like that. And then I hear something and I go, oh yeah, that's right, that makes perfect sense, and I kind of knew that, but yeah, you just said it in a way that, wow, that's really clear. And I don't necessarily say that to the coach, but that's the way I hear it in my head. So
Yeah.
yeah, I have a lot of those conversations, and they're just priceless for me.
Yeah. I remember 2009, I think. Mike Smith was the head coach of the Falcons, and just
Yep.
one of the nicest guys. And I was just a little tadpole, and he stood there in the hallway. I think it was still back at the RCA Dome then. And we talked for about 15 minutes. And he was the first guy, and everyone would say this now, where on defense, it's going to be less about schemes and more about matchups. And that was one of those instances where, yeah, you could see that coming, but the way he put it was like, oh, yeah, it just kind of crystallized the whole thing.
Yeah, and you learn those kinds of things, and that's what's great, because I mean, look, I sit and basically I'm at the point in my career where I watch tape, both college, obviously NFL tape during the season, and I watch a lot of it in the summer as well, when I have an opportunity to watch 5 or 6 games in a row of a team, whether offense or defense. And that's a lot different than watching it each week when I'm trying to watch 12, 13 games every single week. And I watch college as well in the summer for players who, let's say, will be in next year's draft. So this summer, I might watch 40, 50 players who will be in the 2025 draft. So I'm basically doing this 12 months out of the year. So, I just want to keep learning as much as possible. I always feel like if you stop trying to learn, then you just stop. And that's what I try to do.
Well, we don't want to do that, so let's keep learning. And were there maybe a couple things you heard more and more from coaches? Where you and I are looking for philosophies and trends, and we talk about that a lot. Maybe a couple things you heard from coaches and scouts and GMs and whoever, where you think, okay, based on, this number of people who have said this, I kind of think these things are where the NFL is going.
Well, the one thing that's been talked about for a number of years, and obviously people talk about Vic Fangio and quarters coverage, but it's not so much quarters coverage as much as it is quarters structure at the beginning of a play. And, you and I have spoken about this. A lot of people speak about it, but, I had a great breakfast with a defensive coach that I've known for years in the league. And, we talked about that, and just, again, the way he spoke about it just made me go, oh yeah, because one of the things he said, and I don't know if you've thought about it this way, it might seem totally obvious. Maybe people listening go, oh yeah, that's really obvious. But you know what? There's a lot of things that are obvious and a lot of things that are not obvious, and sometimes they kind of merge. But he just said that one of the reasons you see a lot of quarter structure is because everything is capped. And you just think about that for a second, because, for years, everybody was playing cover three. We know that when the Seahawks, going back, and you're very familiar living in the Seattle area with the Legion of Boom, and for years and years, everybody wanted to be the Seahawks and play cover three. And then teams figured out how to attack cover three, much better than they had prior. And also the Seahawks obviously had great personnel. And if you're going to play cover three, you need a post safety who's a big time player, because he's the guy that covers up for mistakes that you and I and the average person don't know that mistakes are made, but the coaches know. And when you have Earl Thomas, mistakes get covered up. But the point is that teams started to figure out, just like going back years with Tony Dungy in cover two, teams start to figure out how to attack cover two. So
it also helps you have Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks and Rondé Barber.
Right. No, I mean, it always helps when you have really good players in any defense, obviously. But just thinking about this coach telling me about, everything is capped, it just made me think about the league, in the fact that where has the league gone in the passing game of late? The league has gone more to RPOs, quick game. Even a team like the Dolphins, everybody thinks Tyreek Hill, yes, they signed him, he can run vertically. And of course, he'll get vertical plays throughout the year because he can run. But I remember thinking when they signed Tyreek Hill a year or so ago, I guess he's been there
2 years.
2 years, right? Yeah. When they made the signing, I thought to myself, because it was Tua, not a guy with a big gun. I thought to myself, you know what? Knowing Mike McDaniel, it's going to be a lot of motion and a lot of quick rhythm throws. And that's what it's turned out to be. But the point is, now if you cap everything, theoretically, even if a guy catches an 8-yard ball, you have people in position to tackle him. Now, whether that happens, now you're getting into people. But the point is, it's tactical. That's what I learned, the tactical stuff, the schematic stuff, because that's the way coaches coach. No question, it's matchups. No question. I remember talking to Chris Spielman when he was still doing games, and we had a great conversation on the phone, and I said, what's the first thing you look at when you prepare for a game? See, I'm a process guy, Doug. I always like the process. That's when I talk to coaches, that's what I try to understand, the process of how they do their job.
You're more into process than outcome, where a lot of people are fixated on outcome.
Yeah, which is why I'm not as interested in analytics as I am about process, because analytics tends to be more results based, and then obviously you take the results and you try to apply them to process, but they're based on results. I like the process of doing it. So I remember I asked Chris Spielman, what's the first thing you look at, and he said matchups. And so obviously we know that matchups matter in the NFL. Of course they do, but there's also a lot of schematics that are not built on one-on-one matchups, and that's what I find really fascinating.
Yep.
I'll give you one quick example.
Yeah,
when I did the book with Jaws and David Plowd, former coworker here,
was just in your office.
Who was just in my office actually, saying hello because he doesn't work here anymore. I remember, one of the chapters, as you know, was on the zone blitz and Dick LeBeau. And now Dick LeBeau did not create the zone blitz, but he's the guy who's the coach who's mostly thought of when you think zone blitz. And by the way, he'd be the first to tell you that he didn't create it, because Dick's
No, he did. He credited Bill Arnsparger, and the Patriots were doing it in the early 60s and all that.
Yeah. I mean, he'll tell you that. But I remember talking to him, and because again, process. And he said, well, I think of the field in terms of quadrants, and I think how I'm going to defend quadrants. And, he said, I don't necessarily explain it to the players that way, but that's the way I see it in my mind. And I found that, that's the kind of stuff I find fascinating, because then if you think about it, it really is interesting, because at the end of the day, football is a game of confined space. It might not seem that way relative to, let's say, basketball or hockey, where the space is much tighter, but it's still a confined space game. So it's really about numbers and spacing. That's really what the game is about. Now, sure, it's about matchups. Sometimes it's, hey, my guy's better than your guy, or sure. But in terms of the schematics of the game, it's about numbers and spacing.
Yeah.
Everybody would like to rush 4 because then you have 7 in coverage. You can handle space better with 7, in the pass game. If you can't get to the quarterback with 4, you have to rush 5. So you know what? Now you only have 6 in coverage, and you can't handle the space the same way that you can with 7. So these are the kinds of things, and my guess is a lot of people don't think about the game like that, fans I'm talking about, but this is the kind of stuff I love learning because this is how coaches think about it.
Sure. I remember when Spags did that, Steve Spagnuolo, who is obviously the guy right now, and justifiably so, did that video with Baldy and I don't remember who else. NFL Jaws.
Yeah.
And he was talking about that a lot, breaking the field into quadrants. And not like he runs quarters all the time. And, these things can be obvious, but you still have to execute them on the field. As Pete Townsend once wrote, the simple things you see are all complicated. And that's kind of...
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because when Spags was in here for that season, which now most people know about, because he talked about it and a lot of people have talked about it. But when he spent time with me in that season, he didn't work. I remember watching, tape and I think his last stop there was maybe New Orleans before. I can't remember, but it might have been. And I remember seeing, footage and saying, hey, Spags, come here. I'd say, this is quarters, right? And he'd say, well, no, it's not really quarters. It looks like that, but the rules are different. And we didn't go over every rule, obviously. But I mean, that's the stuff I love learning because stuff looks like things. And, sometimes it's not that. That's not the way it's taught or coached. To me, that's what football is. Football, I grew up in Queens in New York, and my high school did not have a football team. So I played basketball and baseball. So when I got to, NFL Films and we created the matchup show in 1984 and we got the coaching tape in 91, to me, that was the Rosetta Stone. That changed the whole world for me. And to me, it became an intellectual and academic exercise because having not played, I wasn't coached. And, you got to go knock his ass in the dirt. I wasn't coached in football. So it became an intellectual and academic game. And that's the way I enjoy it the most, because I'm curious about it. There's a curiosity about everything that they do. I can't tell you how many times it happens every day, Doug, and then we can get to players if you like. Every day where I'm watching something and I just wish I had the bat phone to every coach and could just pick it up and say, what were you thinking right there? What was the process as to why you did that and how it mapped out? That's the way I see the game. I don't care, what their game plan is for Sunday, or I don't care what a team's draft board looks like. That's not the stuff that interests me.
No. Well, one thing I did at the Combine this year, it was kind of like all 22 speed dating. I was going around the podiums asking, I think I asked 40 different guys at multiple positions, what was your best play in college, your favorite play, the one you'd want to show to NFL teams, and draw it up for me. Tell me what your route was or tell me what the coverage was.
Yeah, that's a great question.
So I was then able to go back and look at the tape and go, oh, okay, I can see what Cooper DeJean was saying here. I could see what Adonai Mitchell was saying here. That stuff to me is like, okay, you can't always have the bat phone, but as much as I can. And I was just like jumping around like a little rabbit going, what's your favorite play? What's your favorite play? And then I can get that audio and transcribe it and then go back and look at the tape and match it up. And I learned just a ton from that this week because
that's
there's so many different ways to do it.
Of course. And then, that's the great thing about football. There's so many, different ways to do things and the way coaches coach. And there's no one way. You can be good 10 different ways in this league. You can win 10 different ways. And, it's not a mathematical equation. It's not 2 and 2 equals 4. And everybody should be doing it the same way. So, but that to me is just the fun of football. When I said I don't want to know a game plan, sure, I would love to know how a game plan is put together and how they get to it. But obviously during a season, you're not going to know that. You're not going to ask guys that. But no, I think that stuff to me is what's really fascinating about the game.
Yeah, I learned a ton. Well, let's get to some of these players, Greg. And what we're going to do here is as many as we can roll off, like the guys who really impressed in the drills or, the 40 and the 3 cone and whatever. And then what does that mean? Like, what does it mean for their NFL futures? I have Penix and McCarthy here, but we're going to be doing like quarterback stuff later, and there are other guys I want to get to.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, we'll end up, as the weeks continue, we get closer to the draft, probably looking at some specific positions, the ones that are deemed the most important. So, yeah, we can probably leave quarterbacks out for
and
now.
you and I are both rushing to watch as much college tape as we possibly
Yeah.
can because our NFL seasons are a little busy. So let's just go through as many of these guys as we can, and maybe this will be a two-parter. I don't know. But Jaylen Wright, the running back from Tennessee, calling card is explosiveness. 1,010 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns to just 136 carries, 7.4 yards per carry average. Shows up on tape. He ranked second behind Isaac Guerendo in the 40 with a 4.38 40. Led the broad jump at 11.2. He had 34 explosive runs on those 136 carries, and he has so many plays in both gap and zone where he'll use quick vision and speed cuts to get to the open field, and then it's all about that acceleration. And it's with Jaylen Wright, it's really impressive.
Yeah, and I did right. He's a back that I did, and I really liked him. And again, and I'm sure you think the same way, but when I watch guys, what I'm thinking about is how they'll be deployed in the league.
Sure.
There's no back in my view of the ones I've done, and I've only done 3 or 4 up to this point. Obviously, there's always many backs, but my sense is there's not a back that would be seen as a Bijan Robinson in this draft. There may, in fact, not be a back drafted in the first round. We don't know
there
that.
might not be back drafted in the second round. I'm not that they're not good. It's just there's like the tackles and the receivers. It's so freaking loaded.
Right. When I watched Wright, in many ways, I thought of him, and he's not as good as the player I'm about to mention, but now I'm thinking about deployment in the league. Because again, that's what this is about, right, Doug? It's about how a guy, that's why we're watching this. That's why teams do this. This is not in a vacuum of, no, we're trying to figure out what he is in the league.
Well, in your scouting reports that you do, you always say the transition, and that's
and that's, so to me, I thought of Jahmyr Gibbs when I watched Wright. And as I said, he's not Jahmyr Gibbs exactly in terms, Gibbs is more gifted and more talented. But I think Wright can be deployed in a similar fashion. He's a weapon. He's an explosive player. He's a good receiver as well. Could he be a quote-unquote primary back? And by primary, I mean, could he carry the ball 150 times in a given offense? I don't know offhand how many times Jahmyr Gibbs carried the ball, and clearly he was part of a combination backfield with David Montgomery, and I think Wright can be deployed in a similar fashion.
150 touches maybe.
Exactly. And I think he's actually a good runner as well. I mean, just in terms. Now, one thing you're going to hear from people, of course, and whether this is valid or not, that's up to people, is he played in an offense that was true air raid. So you often had 2 stacks outside the numbers on each side, which what does that do? It creates a lighter box. So therefore, he's not running against the kinds of defenses that he will likely see in the NFL. And, that's valid. I don't know if that speaks to his traits level, but that's valid. But I really think he's a very intriguing player for what he brings to the table in an NFL offense.
Yeah. Well, it's like watching quarterbacks. Well, he played in this system. I don't know. Okay, I can't speak to what his NFL coaching staff will do with him because I don't know who his NFL coaching staff is. And you taught me this years ago. You isolate the player. You try and take him out of the scheme as much as possible. What are his transferable traits?
Right.
As opposed to getting bogged down in, he was playing in this crap system, so whatever.
Right. So, I think that he fits in the league. Where he's drafted, how he's deployed. Sometimes guys get deployed in ways that you and I might not think is the best way, which doesn't mean we're smarter than coaches. Look, everybody sees things differently. Smart, reasonable people can disagree on a lot of different things. So we'll see. But I mean, that's the way I saw him, that, he could be part of a 2-person backfield, and that he's an explosive weapon. I mean, you and I both remember when Jahmyr Gibbs was drafted, and a lot of people said, how could you draft a running back with the 12th pick in the draft? And I remember Brad Holmes clear as if it was yesterday, thinking exactly the way I did. And he said in a press conference that he's not a running back, he's a weapon. It turned out to be true.
Speaking of weapons, 2 Texas receivers, and we'll start with the guy who didn't break the record in the 40. We'll get to him in a minute. Adonai Mitchell. He ran a 4.3 40 at 6'2", 205, which isn't bad either. I mean, those Texas receivers, geez. Fast in a straight line, but what really stands out to me about him, Gregor, is speed cuts. He is very sudden in space with subtle movements to displace defenders, and he can cut at full speed.
Yep.
You mentioned this to me a couple years ago. I don't know if it was Jefferson from the Vikings. It may have been, where you brought up how very rare, but a few receivers can make those cuts and not lose anything. And he can do that. He can run full speed without losing a step. He had a 62-yard touchdown against Oklahoma State. And all these plays I mentioned, we're going to put up in the video last season on an out and up, where he just shredded cornerback camps with the 2 speed moves, 10 and 15 yards upfield. And that was it for Smith. Good play, but it's very tough for corners to keep up with him, not just because of the straight line speed, but how he can use subtle and not so subtle movements. Some of those cuts are just obnoxious. And all of a sudden he's 2 yards by you, and you're just like, what happened?
Yeah, I liked Mitchell's tape a lot. He was a kid that played one season at Texas after transferring from Georgia and had a really good year. Did not play a lot at Georgia in 2022. He was hurt. So, he sort of burst onto the scene. But you're correct about the kind of receiver that he is. He's much more of a speed cut route runner than a sink your hips, get in and out of breaks route runner. But I thought there were reps in which he showed a relatively refined sense of attacking corners, getting them off their spot, showing some shake and quickness to create separation. He's a vertical dimension. To me, he's got the physical and athletic traits to develop into a pretty big-time NFL receiver. Now you get into the kid, of course. You and I don't know that. Is he willing to work? How hard is he willing to work? Where does he go? I think he certainly has the attributes to be a boundary X receiver in this league.
Yeah, I would want him out there more than the slot, per se.
Yeah, he can win one-on-one on the outside at all 3 levels. But I really like A.D. Mitchell a lot. And, when he ran that 4.34 at the Combine, that was impressive. But he plays fast on tape.
That's it.
And I think that's the key point.
That's the thing. And he plays fast in a way that's not just a straight line. It's not Ronaldo Nehemiah trying out for the 49ers. I mean, he's got some, that shake and all that. It's really, his tape has been one of the most fun for me to watch so far. So the other guy, Xavier Worthy. And as we say, Greg, fast guys run fast. And boy, did he ever, 4.21. Now, it had some focus drops. His tape was a little weird sometimes, but the deep routes are ridiculous. He had a 44-yard touchdown on a deep over against Alabama's cover 3. I'm sure you remember this play.
Sure.
And all he had to do to safety Caleb Downs would give him a quick fake to the right, like a half-step fake before heading left. And Downs is kind of like, oh, I got to stay with him. And he had a number of plays that I watched both before and after his 40. And, of course, you go back to the tape after something like that where it's kind of, I'm not comparing him to Tyreek Hill. I'm saying with a receiver of that speed, if you make one little millisecond false step, you're done.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I mean, obviously, I was in the Dome, and when he ran the 4.21, I mean, everybody was excited. It was a great moment in time, just one of those moments. But in the overall scheme of what Worthy is, it kind of meant nothing because he's fast. It doesn't matter whether he would have run a 4.21 or a 4.29. He's fast.
Right.
And the tape tells you that he's fast. So, I mean, in that sense, it doesn't matter. It was just a really cool moment. I mean, I think that, we know that he's got accelerating burst and speed. He can run by people. I mean, I remember before the Combine, I typed that he's a high-end vertical separator. I mean, that's what he is.
Yep.
We all probably thought, including myself, that he would certainly run under 4.4. No one knew he'd run a 4.21 because it's the best ever. But, the other thing to remember is 4.21 doesn't automatically mean you're a great NFL receiver. I mean, was it John Ross who ran a 4.22? And who else? There was another guy who ran really well. I can't remember his name. And neither one of those guys really turned out to be a quality NFL receiver. So, I'm not saying that that's going to happen to Worthy. All I'm saying is that specific time doesn't really mean anything in the overall scheme of things because we knew he was fast.
Right. Well, I put those two guys together because I think A.D. Mitchell, I think with his time, and then you go back and watch his tape, and it's like maybe he was a little slept on. I don't know. I'm not like I don't know.
Well, none of it. Yeah, Doug, as you know,
watch that, and then you see the speed.
At this point, everything is being done, and I'm saying this honestly, by people like you and I and others. Now, some other people don't watch tape. You and I are fortunate that we watch tape, and a lot of other writers and so on, they're not watching tape. They don't have access. So whatever anybody says right now, and I say this honestly, is truly meaningless,
Right.
because when people say so and so is rising up the draft board, based on what?
Well, he's
Based on,
rising up. If you're saying that he's rising up your draft board, the team has had him on there, pretty much.
yeah, I mean, when you said, people are sleeping on AD Mitchell, no, they're not. Now
Yeah.
that coaches are watching all these guys, they'll decide what they are. So nobody's sleeping on them. They'll decide. I spoke to a wide receiver coach that I talk to every year, and I wish I had more time with him, but I didn't. And he'd only seen 9 receivers at the time of the combine. So, and he's going to end up seeing 50 of them. But, by the time of the combine, he'd only seen 9, because don't forget about free agency. That's what a lot of these coaches are focused on right now. The legal tampering period starts on Monday, and so that's what a lot of coaches are focused on. So all these comments by writers or draft gurus and whatever, which is why I don't do lists and I don't do that, because it's so meaningless. But it's fun, but it's meaningless. So when people say, well, yeah, people aren't, are sleeping on this guy, or oh boy, this guy might rise up the board. According to who? According to you, and you have nothing to do with it. Not you personally. I'm being rhetorical here. They have nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, I guess let me rephrase that. With a guy like Mitchell, maybe that 4-3-4 it plants a seed in your mind of the stuff you've already watched. Like, not like, oh God, I have to go run back and watch it, but it just.
I mean, I know a scout who works the Texas, that area. He's turned in his reports already. The team has
Right.
the reports. They're not going to announce publicly, oh, here's the report by our guy. So they know what they now. There's more to do in the process. There's obviously visits to the facility. There's obviously pro days. We just had the combine. There's more things that are happening, but at the end of the day, the player on tape is done.
Yep. One more receiver, Xavier Legette from South Carolina, and he was one of the guys who gave me his favorite play. It was really cool.
Which one did he give you?
I'll tell you in a minute. He ran a 4.3940 at 6'1", 220, which not bad at all. And he brought up the drag route against Mississippi State, which he took 76 yards for a touchdown. He said, I was just able to beat the defense. There were 4 defenders with great angles on me, and I was able to slip right past their man coverage. By the way, he also had a 75-yard touchdown against Mississippi State on a vertical route to the boundary. So 76, 75. One was vertical, one was explosive. I mean, both were explosive, but that, it's not just 50 yards downfield. He can do a lot of stuff. And all that shows up on tape. With him, I felt that he's one of those guys where the tape is good and the drills add a little bit of frosting that it just gives him a little extra.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy to watch because, very often guys with that body type, either, there's different guys. There's, an A.J. Brown, who's a great receiver. There's a Laviska Shenault, who didn't quite make it. There's that body type, you have to decide what you think. Now, let me ask you this. He's not quite as big, but did you see someone like a DK Metcalf when you watched Xavier Legette?
Not quite the physical dominance, but the height, weight, speed profile.
I mean, obviously he's 6'1", 223,
Yeah.
and Metcalf 6'4", 228, but I'm talking about, stylistically.
I think stylistically, he reminded me a bit more of Debo. I think.
Yeah, I thought that
as
too.
Body type, I think AJ Brown is pretty instructive.
Yeah,
More than DK.
Yeah, I mean he's. I'm really anxious to see how it plays out for him when he gets to the NFL, because I think he's a really interesting guy when you project him to the next level. I mean, I think that. There are some areas he can improve, and there are some areas he can't because of his body structure. Because just built like that, he's a little stiff, and he's always going to be a little stiff than loose. But he can really run. He's big. He's physical. But that stiffness will limit his ability to change direction fluidly, which I think is one reason he's best running routes that are more straight line linear. Like in breakers, overs, vertical routes. And obviously, if he catches a shallow cross and he has room, he can take it to the house because he can run.
Well, the thing that made me think of Debo, and this is why I loved asking these guys this question, was that he was so proud of a drag route and how he was specific about there are 4 guys in good position on me, and I got them all. And so it wasn't like, oh, I ran this 50-yard deep over, and some receivers said that kind of thing to me. And
right.
So, But I think of like the mentality of a Debo Samuel, where if I asked Debo that, he'd probably say I took a drag route to the house and I did these 4 things.
Right, right.
So anyway,
Um, but there is a physical and competitive component to his game, which is also really, really important when he
yes.
gets to the league.
Yeah, I liked him a lot. Offensive tackle Troy Fautanu, go Dogs. Hello up here in Seattle. Washington's left tackle did well in the drills on the field. I kept hearing from people I trust more and more. He just crushed it in the meeting rooms, like one of the best guys. And he allowed 2 sacks and 23 total pressures in an offense, Craig, where Michael Penix Jr. attempted, this is not a typo, 117 passes of 20 or more air yards. He ran a 5.01 with a 1.71 10-yard split at 6'4", 317. He had one block against Texas that I just loved. He faced edge Ethan Burke and tackled Tavondre Sweat on a switch where Burke faced up on him and then dropped into mid-low coverage, and then Sweat replaced him. And Fautanu, with both those guys, he did, I think it's called like a SWAT move, where he just dropped their hands with his hands, both with quick swipes, negated both of them. That was a 77-yard pass from Penix to Jalen Polk. And, it was like for him, I watched the drills and I saw his 40 and the 10-yard split and then heard how much he crushed it. And of course, he wasn't protecting Penix's blind side. Roger Rosengarten did that because Penix is a lefty. But what were your impressions of Fautanu?
Yeah, I really love Fatanu's tape.
Yeah,
He is really athletic, and you failed to mention one measurable that is really important. His arm length is 34 and a half,
there you
and
go.
that's really long arms. It's interesting. Despite being 6'4", he's kind of more stout and compact in his build and long and rangy.
Mhm.
And I did speak to some people that thought he might end up being a guard, but he's so athletic and he has such quick, light feet, really good balance. His hands, I love the way he uses his hands. I think they need some refinement in how he uses them, but I love the fact that he uses them. They're a major part of how he plays the position.
Well, we put up this play against Texas where we see him just swat the one guy and swat the other guy. And Tavondre Sweat, obviously, big name, big guy. That's what he did. Just like boom, boom, you're out.
Yeah, no, he did that. He used that swipe move a lot, where he just when guys would fall down.
Yeah.
But he has a really high level pass protection combination of athletic movement, lateral quickness, power, hand usage. I really like him. I mean, he's one of my favorite offensive tackles in this draft. Maybe among my top 2.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a fun guy to watch. Just his feet are so light and agile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a great player. Chop Robinson, edge from Penn State. When I watched Robinson pre-combine, I knew he'd have to do well in the drills because so much of his game is just pure speed off the snap and around. Performed well, 6'3", 254, ran the second fast 40 among edge defenders behind Dallas Turner. I think we don't need to discuss Dallas Turner. We know he's good. 1.54, 154 10-yard split tied Turner's for the fastest. 10-8 broad jump tied with Houston Christian's Jalix Hunt for the best in class. And his 4.25 20-yard shuttle was bested only by Western Michigan's Marshawn Nealand, who has become one of my draft binkies for 2024. I can't wait to talk to you about him later. Robinson has some work to do with his upper body and his hands, but he's really tough to deal with when he's just turning the edge. My question for him, Greg, and to you, would be, what do you do in the NFL when tackles who know how to deal with that take away your fastball? He did have a really nice arm over inside move against Northwestern where he then chased the quarterback all the way to the sideline with that speed. So you start to see what there could be after a bit more coaching. And I'll tell you, the guy I really found intriguing, and he's also in this class from Penn State, is Adiza Isaac. I don't know if you've watched him, but that dude is a twitched up ball of fury to the quarterback. But your thoughts on Chop Robinson and maybe why it's so important that he aced the drills?
Well, I think if you just watch him on tape, I watched him last summer with 6 games, and I watched him this year, and I never had a problem with him. I mean, most pass rushers in college need to sort of have a larger array of moves.
Mm-hmm.
So he certainly needs that. There's no question. But in terms of sudden, twitchy explosiveness off the edge, he may be the best guy in this draft.
Yep.
And a lot of people who are not looking at tape will look at his sack total in college and say, oh, well, there's not a lot of production. Well, you got to watch the tape. There were so many plays in which he just beat tackles and didn't get a sack for any number of reasons. There are times he probably needed to be a better finisher. There were other times the ball came out and he, quick. But in some ways they're totally different players. But in some ways, you could think of Danielle Hunter when he was at LSU. I think he had 4.5 sacks in his college career,
Yeah.
and obviously we know he's become a big time sacker in the league. But Chop Robinson is twitchy, explosive.
Yes.
I mean, he is so loose. He's so fluid. He's explosive off the ball. He generates speed and velocity in one step. He can bend. One of the key things to me, if you're going to really challenge the edge as a pass rusher, which you want to be able to do, you want to be able to challenge the edge, is you have to be able to flatten your rush path when you get to the top of the arc. A lot of guys can challenge the edge.
Yeah, you call it the motorcycle lean.
Yeah, motorcycle lean. Yeah. A lot of guys can challenge the edge, the top of the arc, but they then can't flatten their rush path and they get just pushed beyond the quarterback. He can do that. He can flatten his rush path, and that is absolutely critical.
Yep. Couple more guys I want to get into. Trevondre Sweat weighted at 366 in Indianapolis, defensive tackle. He said during the week that he played at 365 last season. He also wanted to run under 5. Sorry, that didn't happen. He wanted to run at 4.540, which would have changed football forever. He did run a 5.27. Robert Griffin III made the point that according to adjusted 40 time, it was like a 180-pound receiver running a 4.26, whatever that means. But the athleticism is there. He had a sack against TCU where he lined up at 3 tech, moved all the way from the guard's outside shoulder to the center's inside shoulder before getting to the quarterback quickly with a killer spin move. So, yeah, he's big. We know that. But there's some pretty interesting athleticism there for a big guy.
This guy grew on me. I mean, look, I saw him at the combine. I hadn't done him yet. And, obviously he looks like a big fat guy because theoretically he is a big fat guy. But do you know that he came to Texas as a high school D end? And when he got to Texas, he was 6'3", 249.
Oh, my. I need to watch that tape.
This kid is one of the most fascinating prospects in the draft as far as I'm concerned because this guy is athletic now.
He is.
I mean, obviously he's massive. Obviously, he has space eater qualities. We know he's difficult to block one-on-one in the run game because he has confined space strength. He can control and displace. But he also has really good quickness. I mean, he made plays where you just saw quickness. I mean, I started to watch him and, I got to tell you, I started to think of Dexter Lawrence. I started to think that if this guy could lose some weight, he came in at 366. Lawrence is 340. I started to think that this guy is similar. This guy is very, very athletic.
And that's high praise because in my opinion, Dexter Lawrence is like Dexter Lawrence and every other nose tackle, and every other nose tackle is way down here. He's one of one. So that's quite a compliment.
I mean, but I'm talking, size and
right.
and just athletic movement.
Sure.
He's somewhat similar. But when I initially started watching him, I couldn't get the fact that he weighed 366 out of my mind. And, when I saw him in person, obviously he is fat. But boy, then you watch the tape and, boy, he's got balance. He's got body control. He could stop. He could redirect in confined space. He showed quickness, lateral agility, closing burst to be an effective pass rusher. I'm fascinated by this guy, and I'm really curious to see where he gets drafted.
Yep. And he was, by the way, right next to Byron Murphy, the second at Texas.
Oh, he's ridiculously good.
Yeah, that's a hell of an interior defensive line. I'll tell you, the guy Sweat reminded me of is Sean Rogers a little bit.
Wow.
Go back a bit of a ways.
I can see that.
Yeah, where he had that like Bill James peak value thing where for a couple of years it was like, oh my God, how does that guy do that? So yeah. Let's see, 2 linebackers real quick. Edgerrin Cooper. And if you watch 2 plays at Texas A&M, he's fast. Just your thoughts on him. And also Payton Wilson, who the injury history is a little weird, and I think that's going to drop him. But, boy, you watch this guy on tape, and he had 11 tackles for loss last year, 22 total pressures, 3 interceptions, 3 pass breakups. I know we're not in analytics video /pod here, but that kind of tells you all the stuff he does. So just your general thoughts to go out on both Cooper and Wilson.
Well, Cooper is a see-ball, get-ball linebacker.
Yep.
He's got light, bouncy feet. He just plays fast. I mean, he sees it and gets it. He's got great play speed. Guys like that, everybody talks about how, they're not good at key and diagnose. I don't know. Sometimes I thought he was. Watching the tape. he's
If I
just
can break in, there was one play against a tackle for loss against Tennessee. You may have seen this where he just blew through the pocket and literally threw Dylan Sampson, the running back, a good 2 yards to the side. It was a bouncer toss, just threw him out of the club. So he can do that.
I mean, this guy goes from 0 to 60 in a heartbeat.
Yep.
He's sudden, he's explosive, he's twitchy. He puts it into drive instantaneously. I mean, this guy truly has elite burst and speed. In some ways, the player he reminded me of, I think he's a little twitchier, but the guy that I thought of when I was watching him was Shaq Leonard coming out of South Carolina State.
Okay.
But I really, really like Cooper as
Yeah.
just because he's so explosive. Payton Wilson was a guy that obviously had a great combine. I was in the dome for his drills. He had a great combine. He's long. He's athletic. He's a height, weight, speed linebacker prospect. That's what he is. He's got size, length. He's got play speed and range. He's a run and chase player, to maximize his play speed and range. I wouldn't say he's not as good as a static, stacked box defender tasked with taking on and playing off blocks.
No.
He didn't do that really well based on his 2023 tape.
No, he needs open space to do what he does.
Yeah, and he needs to keep himself clean. He showed a pretty instinctive feel for doing that. And again, he played a lot of places at North Carolina State, but when he gets to an NFL team, he's going to line up as a stack backer. Mm-hmm. He's not going to play multiple positions early in his career. Whether he ever gets there, that remains to be seen. But, when they start, mini camp OTAs, whatever, he's going to have to play one position, and he's going to be a stack backer.
Right. Yep. Interesting player. Well, Greg, good to be back with you after a couple weeks off after the Super Bowl. I'm sure we all took a couple of naps because now it's post-combine. And next week, we're going to whipsaw right back into free agency. Good Lord, this never stops. But as always, my friend, great stuff. And we'll talk to you next Monday for our big free agency preview.
Thanks, Doug.